Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Around the Nation right here, TYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you on this Friday evening, TGIF. We got a great show for you guys today. We have both fun and disaster, deep dives, and just absurdity. So we're going to start out with Flag Day. That's fun. What did Donald Trump do on Flag Day? Well, the internet responded to a picture that they took on Flag Day. We're going to talk about that. That's fun. Then we've got the meltdown after the disastrous ABC News interview. Donald Trump going after Democrats, of course, as usual. And then we're going to go from that to some serious stuff. We're going to talk about Iran. We'll get a couple of stories on the Iran incident or what happened in the Gulf of Oman. Very interesting stuff. Very, very important. Then we have, of course, Brazil cracking down on a journalist or attempting to. Lots of threats and intimidation going on. I'm going to talk about that. Really important stuff. Then we've got the author of the GOP tax bill saying, oops, it turns out we might be incorrect about the whole growth thing. Yes. And then finally, I have some news about one of the candidates has already suspended their campaign. So we'll talk about that. Fun times, right? Okay, so like I said, we got a lot of stuff to get to, so let's get the fun first, and let's talk about Trump's flag disaster. Props to anybody who gets that reference. It is a song. That is a hint. Okay. Actually, you know what? Before we start the segment, guys, I just want to remind you guys, please like and share the stream. Super, super important that you do that. Helps us out. Also, subscribe. So I was looking at our numbers. 74% of our views this month came from not subscribers. So if you haven't already, please subscribe. Very, very important. Okay, that said, also, if you want to support the show, patreon.com/TYTNation. I'm not saying anything except for we need your help to stay afloat, blah, blah, blah. Patreon.com/TYTNation or sign up to be a channel member through YouTube. It's $5 a month. Most people spend more on coffee. Okay, anyway, so now let's get into the fun. Now, the White House celebrated Flag Day by tweeting out a photo of President Trump getting uncomfortably close to an American flag. I think we all kind of feel a little uncomfortable with Trump that close. And social media users were, of course, a little disturbed by it. Now, again, I want to show you the whole photo in question. So let's take a look. All right. Here it is. That's super close. That's too close. Okay. So let's get to some of the responses to that because it's fun. Walter Schaub just simply says, yikes. Believe me, we get it. Mark Tomlin said, I had to look to see if this was a satire account. No, it's the White House, literally tweeting this out. TSA kid says, I seriously thought this was The Daily Show. Again, nope, not satire. It's real. Diesel Lift says, shameful and disturbing. Rich McCoy says, yep, that's the official White House Twitter. Of all photos, this. I'm sorry. That's creepy. Then, Val at Trippy Food responded by saying, that flag just used the hashtag #MeToo. FTW Forever says, now they're just laughing at everyone. They're feeling invincible right now. Aaron Saska says, technically very disrespectful. Chris Howie remarked, this is real weird. Yeah, trust me. It really is weird. Trumpy says, that photo doesn't come across the way you think it does, White House intern. Chip Horhan says, celebrating the desecration of the flag on an official government account. This administration really has no shame. Mike Trozo points out he's molesting the flag like he does to beauty pageant contestants. Zing. And JV says, stop molesting the flag. Yes, please. And David Roth finally said, I should be better than this, but I laugh every time I see photos of Trump hugging the flag and making his happy face. Planting a couple of fast, hideous kisses right there on the flag, holding it tight and rocking side to side, trying to find some way to grab the flag's ass. And that is a visual none of us actually really needed. But if you think about it, the way he's grabbing that flag is kind of symbolic of the way he's grabbed America. You're welcome. Okay. Short and sweet, and also terrible. Okay. Moving on. I don't think anybody can add anything else to that segment. Now, President Trump went on a complete rampage following last night's disastrous ABC News interview. Now, in that interview, he said he'd be willing to accept dirt on political opponents, even if it came from the Chinese, the Russians, or even from Norway. How dare you, Norway? In fact, I want to go and show you a video of that to show it in context. Let's take a look.
Your campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
You want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it. If I thought there was something wrong, I'd go maybe to the FBI if I thought there was something wrong. But when somebody comes up with Oppo research, right? They come up with Oppo research. Oh, let's call the FBI. The FBI doesn't have enough agents to take care of it. But you go and talk honestly to congressmen. They all do it. They always have. And that's the way it is. It's called Oppo research.
All right, so I kind of dissected why that was completely wrong and also illegal on another video. You can subscribe, of course, to catch that. But following this, and of course following his, as usual, doubling down of saying something stupid, in a series of tweets, the president decided to attack Democrats and then use that to claim that Democrats had spied on him. Let me give you the tweets here. He said, when Senator Mark Warner, VA, spoke at length and in great detail about extremely negative information on me, with a talented entertainer purporting to be a Russian operative, did he immediately call the FBI? No. In fact, he didn't even tell the Senate Intelligence Committee, of which he is a member. When Representative Adam Schiff took calls from another person, also very successfully purporting to be a Russian operative. Really? How successfully? Okay, how does he know all this? The answer is he doesn't, but let's continue. Did he call the FBI? Or even think to call the FBI? No. The fact is that the phony witch hunt is a giant scam where Democrats and other really bad people spied on my campaign. They even had an insurance policy, not detailing what that is, just in case crooked Hillary and the Democrats lost the race for the presidency. Okay, where's the insurance policy? Oh, that must have been in reference to the Mueller report. But he continues by saying, or ends by saying, this is the biggest and worst political scandal in the history of the United States of America. Sad. You've got to love the desperation in these tweets. It's amazing. Okay, so now let's get to the claims, right? So now he claims Warner and Schiff, they got approached by the Russians with Oppo research against Donald Trump, and they didn't even call the FBI. How dare he? So naturally, whenever Donald Trump says something, you look into it, right? And if you look into it, as I have, you find out that, of course, it's a pack of lies. Now, both Schiff and Warner said they did call the FBI about contacts that Trump had mentioned, and their communications at the time backed that up. Now, the situation that Donald Trump was referring to, and he got it, of course, mixed around. He got Warner and Schiff mixed around. But with Schiff, the whole thing happened starting back in the year of our Lord 2017. Now, Schiff spoke to someone by phone purporting to be a Ukrainian government official, claiming to have proof that the Russians had compromising information or compromat on Donald Trump. Wow, that sounds super serious. So now, Schiff, I'm assuming, at least according to Trump assumes, oh, he's very interested and didn't call the FBI whatsoever. Now, that call actually was a prank call from 2 Russian comedians. And those Russian comedians actually leaked out that information, leaked out that call, so we can hear what Schiff had said. Now, in the audio that came out last year, was reported in The Atlantic, Schiff tells the caller that he's going to speak to the FBI and encourages the official to do the same. So they call him up, these pranksters do, and they say, hey, Adam Schiff, we have got compromat on Donald Trump. Would you like to hear? And Schiff says, I got to call the FBI first, and you need to call the FBI too if there's something there. That would, in fact, okay. Let me give you the exact quote that Schiff says, quote, I'll be in touch with the FBI about this, and we'll make arrangements with your staff. I think it would probably be best to provide these materials both to our committee and to the FBI. Schiff also said that he called the FBI before speaking to the pranksters. Quote, we did go to the FBI. The first thing we did was call the FBI, even before we received the call from these individuals. So, oops. Donald Trump, once again, caught in a lie. And of course, the reason that he does this is because he said during that interview, I wouldn't call the FBI. Nobody would call the FBI. Turns out, nope, absolutely wrong. All right, moving on. So he also mentioned Mark Warner. Now, for Warner, Trump is referring to, likely, his lengthy text message exchange in 2017 with a man named Adam Waldman. Now, Adam Waldman is somebody who is connected to both Christopher Steele, the author of the Steele dossier, and the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who I've mentioned on this show before. Subscribe and you can go back and look at those videos. Now, when Waldman initially reached out over text message, Warner had called the FBI about the communication. Derp. Now, in the text message exchange between Warner and Waldman, Warner responds to Waldman's initial request and phone call by saying, quote, have had important call about your message. Will have answer tomorrow. That call was to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, according to a Warner aide. Waldman also notes that after that, he was speaking to officials from the Department of Justice. He said, quote, and this happened several weeks after they began communicating, DOJ called me today. We will talk at 5:30. So, there we have it. Again. Now, Trump also lied about them not telling Congress. In fact, Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, who's a Republican, was aware of the communications with Waldman, and the committee leaders told panel members about the text messages before they were made public. Senator Warner, and this is Marco Rubio now, saying this, Senator Warner fully disclosed this to the committee 4 months ago. He has had zero impact on our work, and that's all he says. And he tweeted that after the text became public. So, who's lying in this instance? Well, that would be, of course, Donald Trump. He can't help himself. He's a walking disaster. I mean, who lets this guy on TV? Funny enough, Laura Ingraham asked the same question. That ABC interview, after it aired, her biggest criticism was, who made this happen? Why was he on TV? Who put a mic in front of his face and allowed him to talk? You can't do that. No, you can't do that. Why? It's because they know he's an idiot. They know that once you stick a mic in front of his face, he's going to say something incredibly stupid. He has already admitted openly to being open to collusion, right? Or in this case, if you don't like the word collusion, if that triggers you somehow, in this case, it would be taking campaign contributions from foreign countries. Now, that would also be a campaign finance violation, right? Now, this can come in the form of direct contributions or even indirect contributions being funneled through different various state parties, etc., state or national parties or national groups, etc., or even in the form of opposition research, oppo research, as they call it. That is a crime. Donald Trump is saying, "Yo, yeah, I'd commit crime." You know why? Because he's a criminal. If he says that that he would do it without a problem, it's likely that he's probably already done it. And we just had an investigation about this entire thing. And here he's admitting, on the one hand, witch hunt, or on one hand, witch hunt, on the other hand, totally would do it. That's why they don't want him to talk. But he does it anyway. He can't help himself. And as I've seen, of course, Donald Trump's a monumental idiot. He is not smart enough to cover up his crimes. And also not smart enough to apparently avoid talking about them. Sad. Okay. Moving on. All right. Before I do that. Okay. So now we go to more serious stuff. And this involves Iran. Now, on Thursday, there were some alleged reports of an attack on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. Now, immediately following that, the news of that coming out, the U.S. immediately pointed their fingers at the country of Iran. Now, in fact, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said this, quote, "The assessment," which is, Iran basically being, blamed for these attacks, the assessment, they said, is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. Now, Pompeo, by the way, did not actually cite any details on the evidence, despite saying all of this and saying, "Look, it's Iran, it's Iran. Look at all the details," except that I have no details. Now, he also asserted that Iran was behind a litany of attacks prior to Thursday's tanker incident. Once again, he did that without providing any sort of evidence. Now, Pompeo said, quote, "Taken as a whole, these unprovoked attacks present a clear threat to international peace and security." Now, you know what actually presents a clear threat to international peace and security? Mike Pompeo. This is how it starts, man. Now, again, let me ask you a question, right? Iran. Why would Iran endanger itself by attacking ships in the Gulf of Oman? Does that make any sense? Where a country that doesn't want to get into a war with the United States would start provoking the United States into a war. That would be disastrous for both Iran and the United States. I mean, sure, you could say, well, it'd be disastrous for the United States. Yeah, but it'd also be disastrous for Iran. Look at what happened in Iraq. Look at what happened in Libya. Look at what happens everywhere the United States gets into a war. It's a disaster for literally both sides. But there are, of course, people that make a lot of money, and that's the defense contractors, and that's oil companies, which, of course, Iran has a lot of oil. And I think that's probably what this is about. Iranian leaders, they're not stupid. I want to be clear. I have no love for the mullahs. I despise the mullahs. I despise the fundamentalist government of Iran. But they're not dumb enough to start a war with the United States. They're just not. They're just not. But defense contractors and people like Mike Pompeo, they are stupid enough to attack Iran. Which, as I mentioned before, this would be an unmitigated disaster. Now, following this farce of a press conference, anti-war groups went after Pompeo. They said this, and this is John Rainwater, Executive Director of Peace Action. Quote, Mike Pompeo has zero credibility when it comes to Iran. He has long been actively campaigning for a confrontation with Iran. He has a track record of pushing bogus theories with no evidence, such as the idea that Iran collaborates closely with Al-Qaeda. Now, to people who don't know the situation, they might be like, oh my God, Iran working with Al-Qaeda. Oh, that's horrible. That's horrifying. I'm scared. But in reality, that's nonsense. Iran, for example, is majority Shia Muslim. Al-Qaeda is a Sunni group. Now, why does that matter? Well, those two sides just happen to despise each other. They hate each other. The idea that they would work closely together is absolute nonsense. But see, Pompeo doesn't care. Why? It's because Pompeo wants war. And unfortunately, that's all these people want, is a conflict with Iran. Now, let me go to another quote here from Rainwater. He said, quote, once again, Pompeo's not waiting for the evidence to come in. He's picking facts to suit his campaign for confrontation with Iran. I think that's fairly clear. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, said this speech is, quote, deja vu, and she compared it to former Secretary of State Colin Powell's weapons of mass destruction speech before the UN back in 2003. I think that is fairly accurate. In fact, she says, quote, Secretary Pompeo gets zero proof, but insists that Iran is responsible for ship attacks in the Gulf of Oman this morning. Lies, lies, and more lies to make a case for war. Let's not be fooled into another disastrous war. And believe me, as I keep saying, it would be a complete and utter disaster that would make Iraq look tame in comparison. And Iraq, of course, is this century's, I think, biggest debacle. Now, in a column following Pompeo's speech, there's more criticism here. Esquire's Charles Pierce writes this, quote, I remember the Iraq lies. I know this administration is truthless from top to bottom and all the way out both sides. I don't trust the Saudi government as far as I can throw a bone saw, which, by the way, the Saudi government are Sunnis, right? They also hate Iran. They hate the Shia. And so we are allies with the Saudis. And so we are enemies of Iran. And so if we invade Iran, that's great for Saudi Arabia, by the way. Now, Saudi Arabia, again, wants us to attack Iran because they want to get more powerful in the region. Now, he continues, Pierce does, by saying, and this president feels very much like he's being run to ground at the moment and needs a distraction. That's the scary part. More of his quote. His Secretary of State is a third-rate Congress critter from Kansas who once advised American soldiers to disobey lawful orders and who's fighting way above his weight class. Also, too, John Bolton is 8 kinds of maniac. And believe me, I have talked about John Bolton, what he really believes. You go back, subscribe for one. You can go back and look at some of those videos where I talk about just the kind of crazy stuff John Bolton believes. And it's real scary. It's end time stuff. So, and of course, war in the Middle East plays right into some of those beliefs. Now, on Twitter, the criticism does not end here. Trita Parsi, founder of the National Iranian American Council, echoed Pierce, writing, quote, a serial liar is president, a warmonger and serial fabricator who helped get us into a disastrous Iraq war, and who has sabotaged numerous attempts at diplomacy is the National Security Advisor. But go-ahead media treat Pompeo's accusations as evidence. Now, that's also super important because what does the media say? The media is treating this and Pompeo as all sorts of serious. You're Iran. Oh, here's Iran starting stuff again. Oh man, they might have attacked these tankers. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Oh, do you hear that? Do you hear? That's the drum beats of war. They're starting once again. As far as I'm concerned, to me, right now, was what I've seen, and I get that I don't have all the evidence, but from what I've seen, and from knowing Pompeo and Bolton, the neoconservatives from all the way back in the Bush administration, this looks like a Gulf of Tonkin moment. And that is not good. It does not make sense for Iran to attack tankers and to invite a disastrous war with the United States. In fact, war is not in their best interest. Why do you think that they actually signed the Iran deal, which allowed inspectors to do invasive inspections into their nuclear program, where they gave up? They didn't even have nuclear weapons. They gave up pretty much their nuclear energy program in order to avoid war with the United States. And what did Trump do when he got into office? He ripped it up. He ripped it up. Why? Because he wants war with Iran. That's scary, man. And it makes a lot of sense that an administration that is right now flailing, filled with neocons, backed by defense contractors, and all that, it makes sense that they would love another war in the Middle East to get fat off of. Hands off Iran, man. Like, we cannot allow our leaders to get us into another disastrous war. We've got to get up and we've got to... Look, this doesn't mean you're defending Iran or the mullahs or agree with them. It just means that we should not invade another country, that we should not get into another war, that we should examine all the evidence and be incredibly skeptical of anything John Bolton, Donald Trump, or any of the other neocons in the administration and the government try to sell us, because they've sold us a war before, a phony war that turned out to be a disaster. And like hell, they're going to try to sell us another one. Okay. All right. And now I'm going to show you evidence against the war. Okay. Now, on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed that Iran was behind an attack on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. Now, in his speech, Pompeo said this, quote, "Our assessment is based on the intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication." He also asserted that Iran has been behind a bunch of other attacks in the region. And he said, taken as a whole, these unprovoked attacks present a clear threat to international peace and security. So again, he is claiming, here's Iran, they're attacking shipping in the area, and we need to do something about it. And that, of course, would end up, in my estimation, and I hope I'm incorrect, but a conflict or a confrontation with Iran, which could turn into a disastrous war. Now, Iran has denied involvement. They said, no, we're not involved. We did not do this. We are not interested in a conflict with the United States. Why would we blow up these tankers or attempt to blow up these tankers? And that's a good question, right? Now, it turns out that a Japanese oil tank owner claims that he has proof that Iran was not behind the attack, or at least there's no evidence, or that he has evidence that contradicts the official U.S. narrative. Now, this is Yutaka Katada, right? And he's one of the owners of the tankers that were crippled by explosions in the Gulf of Oman. He says the United States is wrong about what happened and about the way the attack was carried out. Now, this was during a press conference in Tokyo on Friday. He contradicted Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the U.S. Navy, which released a video that purports to show an Iranian patrol boat removing a limpet mine from the port side of the Kukuka Courageous, which is a ship. Now, Katada says, my ship wasn't attacked on that side. We were not attacked on the port side. We were attacked from the starboard side by not a mine, but a flying object. Huh. He said, quote, it seems that something flew towards them. That created the hole is the report I've received, Katada said, according to the Financial Times. It seems that there was a high chance that they were attacked by a flying object. The impact was well above the water. I don't think it was a torpedo. Now that is interesting. What was the object that hit the tanker? I don't know. It was a flying object. Maybe it was an unidentified flying object. Well, we don't know. We don't know. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it could be. No, seriously, though, it doesn't look like it was the Iranians. I mean, again, the people who own the ship, who got reports from the people who were on the ship, said, I don't think it was the Iranians. I think it was something else, and we don't know what that something else is, but it was not the Iranians. Well, then I would take that report. I would take that and I would believe that report. What else could it be? Again, if it's Iran says, we didn't do it. We have no interest in doing that. We don't want to start a conflict. And the Japanese who were hit are saying, we don't think it's Iran. Then maybe it wasn't Iran. Maybe it was something else. And maybe with an investigation, we will figure it out. We will find what really happened, whether it was an accident or whether it was some sort of unexplained thing from somewhere. Who knows, right? But we actually have to do the evidence. But right now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is saying, oh, no. We don't need evidence. We know it's Iran. And therefore, we're probably going to end up doing something about it. So, again, it could still be Iran. I don't know. I don't know the information, right? But it wouldn't make sense for it to be Iran, because that would be basically be asking the United States, hey, come invade us. Well, that wouldn't make any sense. I have no love for the mullahs, but they're not idiots. They don't want their country invaded by the great Satan, right? No, nobody wants that to happen. But the only people who do want that to happen are people that have a financial interest in the area. You have Mike Pompeo, you have John Bolton, that are two incredible neocon war hawks that have some very disastrous views in the Middle East as it pertains to the end times. Go back and watch some of those previous videos that I've done talking about their beliefs. You can find that by subscribing to our channel. And you also have defense contractors, oil companies. They are all salivating at the thought of a new war with Iran in the Middle East. And with this administration, with Donald Trump mired so deep in scandal, I am afraid that the president will find any excuse, any reason to jump on, into this bandwagon and to go to war as a distraction. I mean, it worked for President Bush, and I'm afraid it could work for Donald Trump. And that would be absolutely disastrous. And it's been shown that Pompeo is a stone-cold liar. And along with corporate media, look, they're trying to steer us towards another disastrous conflict. That's a completely other story. The way that the media has never met a war that they didn't like. They always drumbeat war because it gets good ratings. But I have to tell you, wait for the facts to come out and do not fall for this. Because I warn you, a war with Iran would be an absolute disaster and a debacle 1,000 times worse than the Iraq War. We cannot fall for this. We cannot end up going to war with Iran. And we have to make sure to stop it. That everybody knows that we will not tolerate another disastrous conflict in the Middle East that is only meant to fill the pockets of the oil executives and the CEOs of the defense contract industry. Okay. All right, I'm going to take a break. We'll come back. We got plenty more stuff, including Glenn Greenwald getting threatened for his reports on what's going on in Brazil. Again, important stuff because it's fascism, and fascism happens here just as well as anywhere else. And so, important story. Then we've got the tax bill, and candidate suspends their campaign. Stay right here, Round the Nation. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. TWT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. If you haven't already, please like and share the stream. Really important that you do. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more stories and stuff like this that we've been doing today, then please become a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation. That allows us to continue to do these hard-hitting stories, which get demonetized by YouTube, by the way. So for the Iran stories, for example, that's these. As soon as they hit YouTube, they're going to be demonetized. That's why I need your help. Patreon.com/TYTNation so I can do actual journalism. All right, that said, Martin Trammell, I got time for one comment, says, Iraq, 17 million people, Iran, 80 million people. Better think twice, U.S. warhawks. Agreed. 100%. All right, that said, let's move on. Let's talk about journalism in Brazil. All right. Now, we've just learned that journalist Glenn Greenwald has been facing threats in his home country since the election of a fascist ultra-right-wing leader. Now, Greenwald currently lives in Brazil with his husband and 2 children, and has been a vocal critic of the Bolsonaro government. Now, that's Jair Bolsonaro. He is president of Brazil, and of course, he is an ultra-right-wing nationalist. Now, The Intercept, which is the company that he co-founded, does a lot of great journalism, and they've been talking a lot about the treatment of leftist politician Lula da Silva. Now, Da Silva has been imprisoned on vague charges of corruption. Now, nobody likes corruption, and so Bolsonaro and a lot of right-wing politicians have been running on anti-corruption. Oh, we got to get out the corruption in the government, Brazil. And, of course, that's something that's really popular with the people, ending that corruption. So now they did this, right? Now, The Intercept has been publishing documents that shows that, and these are chats that showed that Brazil's justice minister, who is now part of the Bolsonaro government, had conspired to keep Da Silva out of the 2018 presidential race. Now that's important because Da Silva, Lula, is actually would have actually won that race. Was incredibly popular, and so what does a right-wing person do while facing a very strong left-wing challenger? Apparently, they accuse him of corruption and put him in prison so that he cannot run against their candidate. And so that's what happened, right? Now, he was hit with corruption charges by former anti-corruption judge and now Bolsonaro cabinet member Sergio Moro. Now, the Telegram chats provided to The Intercept by an anonymous source have triggered calls for the resignation of Mr. Moro, who spearheaded a massive graft investigation known as the Car Wash before he joined far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's cabinet back in January. Now, the corruption probe, Car Wash, which began in 2014, supposedly uncovered large-scale looting of state oil company Petrobras. And look, there's a lot of information going on in this, a lot of which I haven't really covered, haven't really talked about. There's somebody that's talked a lot about this, and that's Michael Brooks. So Michael Brooks is incredibly smart, and he's been covering this a lot. And so I would definitely suggest that everybody check out his channel. Again, he does a great job explaining this corruption probe, and while Lula da Silva has basically been set up by Bolsonaro. Now, this anti-corruption probe took out a lot of high-powered people, right? It took them down, but there are a lot of people who've been wondering whether or not some of the people who were busted in this corruption ring were actually guilty of corruption, and whether or not this has been actually used to help bring a far-right politician into power that would benefit business interests. Now, again, Michael Brooks has done a great job. I suggest you check his channel out. Now, polls show that that Lula was likely to win this election, which again makes you think, he's about to win the election. He's incredibly popular. The left wing has been in control of Brazil's politics for quite a long time, and then suddenly, look, corruption, taking bribes. We can't have that. So we're going to jail this guy who's incredibly popular. And now our candidate, somebody who wants to sell off pieces of the rainforest corporations, or the entire rainforest, which is actually called the lungs of the planet, super, super important to keep your hands off. Well, he wins. He wins. Real strange. Now, critics say Moro allegedly targeted Lula and his Workers' Party, called the PT, in order to end decades of left-wing rule in Brazil and open the Amazon to corporate interests, as I had mentioned before. Now, for Greenwald's part, The Intercept has been doing a lot of great reporting on this, and that has caught the attention of the government, and they are facing what I believe to be a political reprisal. Now, Greenwald says, for his part, quote, "We knew that when we were going to report on very powerful figures who are part of the Bolsonaro government, that was going to generate a lot of hatred, animosity, and threats." And in response, he has received some really disgusting and detailed and grotesque graphic threats that are disturbing that we take very seriously. The menacing messages sent via email and social media have also targeted his husband, Brazilian lawmaker David Miranda, and their 2 adopted children. So that's kind of what happens when you take on the powerful. You get threats, intimidation, sometimes even worse. But despite all that, Greenwald says, no, I'm not leaving. This is my home. Quote, "It's a country that belongs to my children and my husband. We've taken all the measures that we feel like we should take for our legal and physical security. After that, you have to go about and do your work." Now, look, like him or not, believe he's right on some things and believe he's wrong on others. I think he's a little bit of a mixed bag sometimes. But that shows dedication to your craft. To face down these kinds of threats and to say, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to fight for my country. I love it. And he says, and I love this quote, where he says, journalism is about confronting powerful people. Now, the evidence that he collected that was released by The Intercept is pretty damning. Now, in the linked group chats, car wash prosecutors expressed, quote, serious doubts over the evidence against Lula and spoke openly of wanting to prevent the PT from winning the 2018 presidential election that Lula was widely expected to win. Moro repeatedly overstepped the ethical lines that define the role of a judge by offering prosecutors advice and tips for new avenues of investigation, The Intercept said. Huh. Now, doesn't that seem a little rigged? Doesn't that seem a little corrupt? Where you have a judge saying, oh, by the way, this will help your case against the person, against Lula, right? That I'm supposed to be fair and impartial on. No, that's not a fair and impartial judge. Now, Moro, he's like, oh, no, I didn't do anything wrong. And by the way, the messages, somebody hacked us. And in other statements, they also said, well, these were made up. Well, which is it? Were they hacked or were they made up? Are they fake news or not? Gee, I wonder where they learned that one, by the way. Calling things fake news. No. According to, The Intercept, they had an ongoing collaborative relationship which violates the Constitution and the Code of Judicial Ethics in a way that calls into question every verdict that Moro issued as part of the car wash case. Look, nobody likes corruption, right? So what's the best way for a politician, especially a right-wing politician, to get into power? Claim that the other side's corrupt. And then promise to clean it up. Now, we've heard this before, right? Because we've had something similar here in the United States. Crooked Hillary, corruption. I'm going to drain the swamp. Does that sound familiar? Again, Donald Trump wanted to lock up Hillary Clinton. The chance, lock her up, lock her up. Well, in this case, Bolsonaro was actually able to lock up his political opponent. That's why this is basically a political, I don't want to say hit job, but kind of. He is a political prisoner in Brazil. And that's what the far right does. And the irony, of course, is usually the ones that are claiming to want to crack down on corruption are always the most corrupt. It's not an accident that Moro gets a cushy position in the Bolsonaro government because he basically handed him the election. And now the people who are trying to spread the truth about what are happening are getting attacked because they despise, the people in power despise the press. See, and we see it whenever a right-winger gets into power. They always attack the press when they question their power. They don't attack the press that are the lapdogs, that are the ones that carry the official narrative. But when you don't, watch out. Watch out. Now, however you feel about Greenwald, you should not be okay with this, getting threats and intimidation. Now, we need more people that are out there questioning the official government narrative. So I hope for Greenwald's safety, and I hope that he can continue his work exposing the corrupt Bolsonaro government. Okay. Moving on. Now, a major architect of the Trump tax cuts finally admits that the entire premise of the tax cuts, them paying for themselves, doesn't actually work. Now, this is Representative Kevin Brady. Now, he's the former chairman of the House Ways and Means and Taxation Committees, and he had admitted that it was, quote, hard to know how much of the cuts were fully paid for at the Peterson Foundation's annual fiscal summit. He said, quote, "We don't know now, and it's hard to know now, but maybe we will know in year 8, 9, or 10 what revenues the tax cuts brought into the government over time. Right now, it's just way too early to tell." Oh, is it? No, it's not. It's not too early to tell. If you just look at the reduced revenues, which is reflected in, of course, having a higher deficit. And what do we have? We have higher deficits. Look, even without looking at all that, it's kind of ridiculous to think that cutting revenue would somehow increase revenue. That makes no sense. Oh no, if we cut our income, then we end up getting more money. In what world does that actually work? It doesn't. It doesn't. There's no world where that actually happens. It's made up. It's a pipe dream. I know. But Jeff, growth. It's going to supercharge the economy. It's growth. It's growth. Okay, well, let's look at the growth, right? Or actually, let's look at the cost first. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the cost of the tax cuts is actually around $1.9 trillion. And that's even taking into account any additional growth. And that's just projections of growth. We don't necessarily know. Oops. $1.9 trillion, even taking in any sort of growth. I thought it was supposed to pay for themselves. I thought it was supposed to be revenue neutral. Oh, it turns out, no, that was a lie. Now, Brady says, well, I mean, even though it's not going to bring in that kind of growth or pay for themselves, the tax cuts were still a good investment. Really? He said, quote, "I don't think anything could have been worse for the deficit than to stick with the old economy and stick with the tax code that was so outdated." Now, again, we have more debt. We have more deficits, higher deficits, right? And still low growth. How is this better? Oh, right, it's not. At least not for the American economy. At least it's not for regular working people. Now, as far as outdated goes, you want to know what's outdated? The idea that tax cuts pay for themselves and that the wealth will somehow trickle down. It's not. Those two notions have been completely and utterly debunked over the last 40 years. When we lowered taxes on the rich, we did not have more growth. We had larger deficits, which, by the way, Republicans blame on poor people needing welfare and higher concentrations of wealth at the top. That has not trickled down. In fact, rich people just keep getting richer. As for growth, GDP is up about 0.7% from last year. Not 1%, not 2%, basically growing at Obama levels. Well, Obama really didn't do a whole lot. The only tax increase that he got through was through the ACA. Okay, that's fine. That actually is a progressive tax. But when it comes to marginal rates on the wealthiest Americans, they stayed basically the same, about 31%. That is until Donald Trump, 35%, until Donald Trump and the Republicans lowered it to 21%. And still, no growth, right? No noticeable bump in growth. And this is especially important, no noticeable bump in wages. Nothing, no bump unless you were incredibly wealthy. Then you got a gigantic bump. A huge one. Whatever happened to supercharging the economy? No, what happened is the corporations got the money and they did gigantic stock buybacks. They didn't raise wages. They didn't offer better benefits. They didn't create more jobs. No. They rewarded themselves by inflating their own stock values, which creates an artificial bubble, making the company appear to be more wealthy than it actually is. They're not more wealthy. They're not doing better. It just looks like it so that investors will go in and buy shares. And once they buy shares, executives cash in and they put that money in their own pockets. And this is all while corporations are paying less taxes than ever. And while this happens, individual tax cuts have been negated by the rate of inflation. So congratulations, your tax cuts have done nothing. You know what's going on right now? 40% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency. 60% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency. That's a car breaking down, that's a transmission going out. Almost half of all Americans cannot afford basic necessities for survival. That's not a situation where you need to budget better. You can budget all day, but if the money doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. If you're not getting paid enough, no amount of magical budgeting is going to fix your problem. And besides, half of all Americans are not lazy, irresponsible people. No, it's the economy, and these tax cuts do nothing for these people. Do you know, on average, people making around the federal minimum wage, it's $15,000 a year, and up to $25,000 a year, they got an average tax cut of around $40 for the entire year. $40, while the rich, the top 1%, save an average of $33,000 per year. Is it any question who these tax cuts served? They are, as usual, for the rich, by the rich. And it just shows you again how much trickle-down is, how much of a scam it is, because it has and always will be a scam. Don't believe it when they tell you, no, tax cuts are going to create jobs and create growth. It never happens. It never will. One more story. And on a fun note.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Down goes Howard Schultz. Down goes Howard Schultz, at least sort of. The former Starbucks CEO and defender of wealthy people everywhere named Howard Schultz is now suspending his campaign. This is according to HuffPost. Schultz told his campaign staffers that he was slashing his operation after taking some time out to get better after having back surgery. Now, Schultz apparently came into the office on Wednesday for the first time in months and met with his staff, a person in the room told the website. Later, Schultz sent an email to backers about his bad back, so all two of his backers now have the information of, oh, it turns out he hurt his back. In fact, here's what the email said. While I was in Arizona, I unfortunately experienced acute back pain that required me to cut my travels short. Over the following 2 months, I underwent 3 separate back surgeries. Today, I'm feeling much better, and my doctors foresee a full recovery so long as I rest and rehabilitate. I have decided to take the summer to do just that. Why don't you take the summer and then the rest of time to recover and just drop out? You're pulling it 0%. Why are you even there? Well, I know the answer of why he's there: to defend his own fortune from people like maybe Bernie Sanders, who actually wants to, and Elizabeth Warren, who want to actually tax the rich, people like Howard Schultz, and use that money to better society. Now, I think it's kind of funny that the guy who can just take the summer off, get 3 back surgeries, is now telling the American people that we can't have things like Medicare for all. It's those people who tell the factory worker or the Amazon warehouse worker that, who also likely have that kind of pain. I know, I used to be a factory worker and I have back pain. But he tells those people, oh, no, you just need to work harder so that maybe one day you can afford a back surgery, that you can maybe have health care somewhere. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to have to go to the ability to go to the doctor and have them fix whatever's wrong with your back or knee or whatever, right? Without having to worry about bankrupting yourself? That would be fantastic. But Howard Schultz, he already lives that life. He never has to worry about healthcare costs. But he wants to prevent you from getting Medicare for all, for getting your own health care. He says, oh no, how are we going to pay for it? We can't afford that. You can afford it. How are we going to pay for it? We can tax your ass. That's how we can do it. Look, I just love it when overprivileged people tell us what we can and cannot have as a society. And apparently, Democratic voters also love it because John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, and Howard Schultz, when you put them all together, they still polled at about 0%. Whereas people who actually have plans, like, for example, Senator Bernie Sanders, with the Medicare for All plan, people like him are in second place in the Democratic primary. And policies like Medicare for All polled at an astounding 77%. Have a good recovery, Howard. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. That's all I got. Thanks, guys. Going around the nation with me today. Please like and share the stream. Please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. Like and subscribe. Very, very important. Tell everybody to like and subscribe. And we will see you on Monday. Have an amazing weekend. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. Have a great weekend.